From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom. On today's show, what does it say about a major American city like, well, let's just say this one, for example, when it opens to the public the opportunity to apply for housing, either the physical kind in the form of a publicly owned or managed unit, or a piece of paper that entitles the holder to subsidized rent pretty much anywhere in the city? What does it say when the total number of households that apply for that service equals a quarter, 25% of the total number of existing households in the city? Well, it can be interpreted a lot of ways, I guess, but one thing is for sure. Our city has a problem with the provision of quality, secure, affordable housing for a major portion of our population. So we decided what we should do is convene an all-star panel of journalists to give us a housing gut check today, and that's what we're going to do. Jonah Newman is joining us for the first time on the panel today. Jonah, glad to have you on the show. Jonah's recently joined the Chicago Reporter. That's one of our favorite publications, and he just wrote a very interesting summary of the results of the CHA's just completed opening of its wait list. And we're going to talk to him about that and then get other reaction from folks like Lolly Bowean joining us again. From the Chicago Tribune, General Assignment Reporter, glad to have you back on the show. Lolly?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming back. And of course, Michaeli, author, journalist, We the People Media, and veteran at this table. So glad to have you back again, Eitan. When it comes to talking about housing and those kinds of things, you're one of the go-to guys, as is Natalie Moore from WBEZ, author and bureau chief of the Southside Bureau for WBEZ. Just glad to have you all here.
Thank you.
So, you started this. I read the piece that you just wrote in the Reporter, which kind of made that connection. I used to work for the city, and I am very much familiar with the fact that there are about 1 million households, generally speaking, in the city of Chicago. But it never occurred to me that 250,000 households were in this process. We're standing in line to get one of these services. And it just kind of like hit me over the head. So paint for us a quick picture of your summary. Summarize your summary.
So yeah, like you said, you know, there were 282 or so thousand households who signed up for the Chicago Housing Authority's wait list. That's the sort of combined wait list this year for, like you said, both physical public housing and voucher housing choice vouchers, and yeah, that's more than a quarter of all households in Chicago. I was crunching the numbers a little bit more last night, and what actually is even perhaps more shocking is actually about 40% of households in the city meet the income requirements for Chicago public housing. So that's 80% of area median income. That's for a one-person household about $40,500 a year. So actually the number of people who sign up for the wait list is quite a bit below the total number of households who are eligible, who could have signed up for the wait list. So what does that say? Obviously, there's a lot of people in this city who are really in need of quality, affordable housing, who feel like this is one of their options, if not maybe their best option to get it, despite the fact that we know that the average wait list time for someone waiting on the wait list is about 3.5 years, 41 months, and the fact that most of those people who do sign up for the wait list probably aren't going to get housing anytime in the foreseeable future.
I think also what's significant about what you found is that with the reputation of public housing as it is, people overcame that to sign up for the waiting list. You know, public housing has been maligned in the public eye for many, many, many years, and yet you still have a quarter of the households in the city applying. That's something that really stood out to me, both about the need for public housing and I think about the condition that families are in this city. That's speaks, I think, to a desperation for the kind of housing that is affordable and probably over quality. Probably affordability is ranking up there. If you were able to survey the people that applied, I'll bet that you would find that affordability is far more important than even quality.
You don't have to be poor I think that that's what a lot of the stereotypes with low-income housing or even the vouchers. I don't know if I should say most, but people who have housing vouchers do have jobs. And there is this impression that, oh, I'm subsidizing all these people, they're lazy, they're not working, they're also on food stamps. There are many, many families that work, and really CHA is the affordable housing go-to in this city because it's not happening in other places the way that it should be, or it's just concentrated in certain parts of the city.
And we have to remember the layers of need for affordable housing, that it's not just young people who have families who are in need of affordable housing and younger people who are working. They're also the disabled, they're also the elderly who are in need of subsidized housing. So there's just a large variety of different people who are in need, and that list will show you that. There are so many people in this city, as I'm sure you all have witnessed as you go out to interview the residents who are applying for these programs, who are living very layered. You know, they're living multi-family in one household, who see this as the opportunity to finally apply to get independent housing that they could possibly afford.
I think one of the things we've seen from, you know, some of the studies Daniel Hertz has done and other people is that we're just seeing this continually separating division in Chicago of the haves and have-nots. I mean, when you say that 40% of our city could qualify for public housing, I mean, just think about that. Just think about what that says. And yet, there's a good 20-25% of our city that couldn't qualify for public housing if they, you know, if they unloaded 80% of their income, they still wouldn't. So it's something is just completely out of balance here.
It's a national phenomenon, right? We're talking about a bifurcation of wealth in this whole country, in which people at the top of the economic spectrum control an enormous amount of wealth, and people at the lower end of the spectrum are struggling. And that's true especially for younger people. Millennials are increasingly dependent on their parents and their families in general to get by. They're not making salaries. Public housing was a resource that was being provided to people, and it had an effect that radiated throughout the entire economy. We've removed public housing as part of the mix. Part of the maligning of the reputation of public housing was a pretext to demolishing public housing and really reducing the overall number of units. Chicago, I think, is a perfect exemplar of what we've done throughout the country. Now public housing is gone. The problem remains. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to provide resources to start to equalize the imbalance in resources that's out there across class lines?
We've talked so often about this, many of us here at this very same table, but the idea that the plan for transformation is probably one of the most cynically named programs in the history of Chicago.
Not a plan.
It's not a plan. It didn't transform anything. What it did was it just basically took the city largely out of the business of being a landlord, of being a public housing provider. Well, I mean, I think it's safe almost now to make that statement. It's been years.
Well, they're still providing a lot of public housing. They're just doing it through housing choice vouchers. And if you could argue, I think, and it's a fair argument to say that this is a big fat subsidy for a lot of large private landlords who have a real advantage in terms of providing housing for people with vouchers because of the restrictions that are there in terms of what kind of housing you can provide and the expense of maintaining things to the standards of the federal government mandates.
And unlike Atlanta completely got rid of its public housing. It's all vouchered. So on the south side, you're still seeing some pockets like Wentworth Gardens, Altgale, Trumbull, Dearborn. A number of those have been redeveloped quite nicely, I think some people would say.
So, much of it was,
But then there are questions about, well, who gets mixed income and who gets redevelopment. And residents are going to want the redevelopment so they can keep their units and not get pushed out if it's considered more prime land, like a Cabrini Green, for example, or what's happening in Lathrop currently.
Well, and I mean, that's another thing. That there are all these buckets of things to talk about. You know, the Altgeld and Lathrop redevelopments are very much stalled because there are so many disputes about how to go about it. But meanwhile, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of empty units sitting in the CHA's roster when there are all these people who desperately need housing, but we just can't seem to
and hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in the CHA's coffers. At least $300+ million, according
over
to the CHA now admits to it being over 4.
The Center for Tax Accountability said it was over 400.
You know, there are people who say it could be as some of the housing activists will rate it as closer to 6 or over 6, right?
This is inside baseball stuff, but we need to explain what this is. The CHA gets money from the federal government to fund its voucher program, right? Well, tell me when I go off the rails.
And its public housing program.
And its public
Everything,
housing. Okay.
yes,
But I thought it was the voucher program that they were basically just putting in the bank. But what anyway? They're not spending
They
the
have
money.
reserves.
They have reserves.
I'll see.
I mean, one thing that I've learned this year, maybe I should have known it, is that there really isn't any political will. People may remember Cranes did a story some months ago about super vouchers. So a very small number of residents who were living in these luxurious high rises. And it came off as these people don't really belong here. I did that same story months earlier, but it was about discrimination that families faced trying to rent in River North. And maybe I'm showing my own bias in it, but you know, my reaction wasn't, well, I can't afford there, I shouldn't live there. The problem with the voucher program is that it's ended up concentrating families in poor, segregated neighborhoods. So if you have a handful of families that can live in the central district by Lake Michigan, I don't know if that's a bad thing, and it was legal. And so, but then what happened, you get a congressman who doesn't even live in Chicago raising hell about it. There are so many things to call CHA on the carpet on, and that is the one thing that CHA completely reversed. And so it made me think, well, if this plan for transformation is going to get done, if some of this reserve is going to be spent, it's not going to be the reporters putting, well, I guess reporters are putting pressure, but maybe people cared more about the, you know, certain outlets, but basically you had politicians come in and lambast that. And I think until that's what it clicked for me. Nothing is going to change with CHA on any of these issues until some politicians with heavyweights come in and say change it.
I want to add to what I want to add to what just Natalie said. With the plan for transformation, when we knocked down these high rises, we said that we wanted to segregate these pockets of poverty, that we did not want to keep people in places where all poor people were living under the same conditions. So the super voucher, as a so-called program, does allow a very small amount of families to move into neighborhoods where there could be a possibility of better schools, of better jobs, of better outcomes. And then there was this sort of kickback, and the program was adjusted almost immediately. So I agree with what Natalie is saying about the political will to push and enforce change.
Well, and you have to remember, a voucher doesn't guarantee you housing, right? The landlord has to accept your voucher. And so there are lots of landlords all over the city who see that you're coming to them with a voucher and they don't want to accept that. They don't want to deal with CHA. They don't want to deal with the regulations. They don't want to, frankly, deal with poor people. And so, you know, that really limits the opportunity for, you know, there's this claim that it's, you know, it's called the housing choice voucher, like you can take this voucher and have a choice of anywhere in the city you want to live, but that's just not the case, you know. Anywhere
in a few neighborhoods on the south and west sides. I mean, and since we're raising the political issue, let's think for a moment, or I'll just say it, that I do consider this the opening of the waiting list something that has very suspicious timing. That it's after years of inaction under this Mayor Emanuel. Suddenly the Housing Authority is doing something that has the appearance of providing resources to people who need it several months before the election. And I'm sorry, it does not wash for me as something that is a sincere effort or is something that makes up for the years of inaction under this administration.
Well, I wonder if we could we do a kind of a gut check on Mayor Emanuel's CHA? I mean, he is the mayor. He's been mayor for a full term now, and the CHA has, I would say, been efficiently invisible during Mayor Emanuel's term. Michael Merchant is the new boss over there. He is clearly Mayor Emanuel's choice. He was his building commissioner after all. So talk to me about this. Talk to me about what the status is of the CHA today. Is it becoming a more dynamic agency again? Is it still a kind of a sleepy place where buildings go to be demolished?
This is the worst incarnation of the CHA that I have seen in 20 plus years of covering the agency. And when I say the worst,
that's a lot of years.
That's a lot of years. And it's I say the worst because it's doing the least. It's seems to be the least concerned with the people that it's supposed to serve. And also within the agency itself, I hear that morale is desperately low, frankly, because there is a top layer of political appointees that may or may not have any qualifications for their jobs. One alderman's wife recently received a position as the head of facilities management in the Housing Authority without really any experience in that area. And this has an effect on employees in the lower ranks, that they have no chance for promotion, they have no chance for advancement, and they have no chance to really do their jobs of providing housing to people who need it. So you're dispirited, you're upset, and you start looking for jobs elsewhere. You're really just taking up space at your desk until you find an opportunity to leave. And it's I think a good example in general of the way that this mayor has operated, in the sense that if it has a political benefit to him, he is willing to move on it and take aggressive steps. If he's not sure that it has a political benefit, or if he doesn't see the political benefit, he won't do anything. And the people under him have no courage and no independence to move on their own.
Okay, well, thanks for coming, everybody. That's a pretty grim assessment for somebody who has really actually been an observer of the CHA for many, many years. I mean, I must say I'm actually a little shocked to hear that, because I thought perhaps things were going to...
I mean, you think things are worse than when the conditions when the plan first started?
Oh yeah, because at that time the Housing Authority still provided some services to residents that have now been wiped away. Even the kind of horrible, poorly designed programs that were out there were still doing, little bits of something here and there. Those have all vanished for the most part. So yeah, I think, and I'm hearing from CHA employees the kind of lack of morale or deterioration in morale that's there. It's not my opinion, it's what people are telling me all day, every day, that they just shrug their shoulders. They try to do stuff, they get blocked. They try to complain about something, they get slapped down. So they just don't feel that they really have a chance to do their jobs.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that we need to remember that when the plan for transformation was implemented, that we were in a desperate need to reform public housing, and that this was a long-term plan that didn't take into consideration the fact that the market may change, that the political climate may change, and there's been a lot of factors that have influenced the way CHA operates, and yet they've stuck with this plan. And so as a result of that, I think we see an agency that on paper, when you look at their budget, when you look at their financials, on paper, it can look robust. It can look like an agency that is balancing its books and doing the quote right thing.
Balancing its books has got a $300, $400, $500, $600 plus side.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're sitting on a lot of money, which in business speak has tended to be a good thing. But then when you look at the number of people that are being served and the number of people that need to be served and that are not being served, then there's concern. And so I think that it's almost like we have to look and see, what is this agency? There's also been a lot of turnover at the top of the agency too, very rapidly. So you have this long-term plan with a lot of different people taking the head of the agency. So not to say in their defense, but there's been a lot of changes that have happened in the past 12 years since this plan was implemented.
What are the quick numbers? I know the plan for transformation demolished, what was it? How many units? 20,000 units or something?
There are a lot of different ways to count the number of units that were demolished.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that the CHA began with over 100,000 units hard units, and is now down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 units.
It's amazing.
That are occupiable, that are available to people to actually live in.
Right. But of those 20,000,
about 2,000 are sitting empty.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those are at Lathrop, at Alkeld. There's about 99, I think, at Henry Horner. And keep in mind, those are units that actually have already been through one phase of redevelopment, and now they're going through another phase of redevelopment.
Right.
And I think it sort of speaks to the perception of the agency that they really don't want to replace public housing with public housing, right? So the new plan for the Horner super block, they call it, that had, I think, about 200 public housing units is to redevelop it as mixed income, of course, and replace it with about 90 to 95 public housing units. So you're cutting the number of public housing units just there in half. And again, these are units that have already been through this plan once already, right? So
I mean, this whole issue of mixed income housing replacement is so fraught, and it's such a long, complicated conversation to get into. But I mean, in essence, the flavor of the day a few years ago was if you knock down public housing, you shouldn't just replace it to concentrate poor people. Okay, you got me, I'm with you so far. And what you should do is you should try to the degree possible, you know, do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That was Mayor Daley's mantra, right? 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Well,
affordable housing, public housing, and market rate housing, right?
That has a certain kind of public relations value when you say 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But there's really zero evidence that has any kind of benefit for residents. And frankly, it was pretty insulting in my book that the whole idea was predicated on exposing residents to other classes to kind of help them improve their lifestyle, as if poverty was a self-imposed condition that wasn't the result of an absence of resources and support. And it was never going to work. I don't think the people I'm not even sure that the people who proposed it thought that it was going to work. And the result has been, there's some excellent reporting from Natalie and from Lolly about this, that the mixed income communities do not in fact exist. That in the places where the housing authority will say, like, oh, we have a mix, it's not actually a mix if you look closer. If you look closer at like the
Oakwood
Shores, you know, it's almost 100% public housing when you count people who are using housing choice vouchers to get a unit in a mixed income development.
So it's adjacency, but it's
well, I mean, on one hand, that's the CHA taking notice. Well, we can't rent these out. We can't sell, the market crash, and they had to do something. But you know, the larger issue here, you know, there wasn't a lot of research about mixed income working, but there have to be conversations even outside of CHA, but just housing in general, concentrating housing in poor, segregated neighborhoods. That does not work. It doesn't mean, I mean, I think there was this idea, oh, I'm poor and my market rate neighbor is going to give me a job. You know, I don't think that those kind of connections happen, but there does have to be some serious discussion, again, not just with CHA, but how to integrate these neighborhoods, you know, with income or with race, because, you know, the most desperate neighborhoods, and they have good things going on in them too. I don't want to paint them with one broad stroke, but, you know, it's the same thing that's happening. The same neighborhoods have the same issues, and then now you're putting more voucher holders in those neighborhoods.
Right. There was a whole thing that happened yesterday at the city council, because this opens up another can of worms, but the whole issue of the city of Chicago saying that if you're, now we're not talking the public sector, we're talking more like the developer sector, the private sector, if you're going to build a building, you have to put a certain number of affordable units in that building. And that is the law, and you must do it. Unless, of course, you want to just pay us some money, and then you don't have to. To which I say, you know, I would really like to pay into a fee that says I don't have to pay the parking meters anymore. If I can just slide the city $100 and then just park anywhere I want for free. That's basically what this is. And so now what we're talking about is, well, we'll just increase the subsidy. So instead of 50,000, it's going to be 150,000 or something if it's in a bigger building. But the issue is, how many affordable units did this program build? And the answer is?
247, according to yesterday's Chicago Tribune story.
In how many years?
Since 2007,
Yeah, okay,
compared to $19 million paid into the city's coffers as the alternative.
Yeah, so it's a good way to raise some money. But,
well, and then people talk about, poor people with subsidies. There are all these sweetheart deals that happen with these big developments, and that is never really articulated well. It's just poor people.
Talk about who the welfare queens are.
Receive subsidies. And I just wanted to add one other thing. The last time CHA opened the wait list for family housing, so what made this wait list unique is that they opened all 3 lists together. So the last family list was in 2010, and there were 210 families who applied to be on that waiting list. And I think the voucher was in 2008 before then. So these numbers have been pretty consistent over the past decade.
Well, and then what happens is they call the wait list, a couple years later by trying to, sending out letters and emails and phone calls to everyone on the wait list, and anyone who doesn't respond, they take them off the list after a certain number of months. So the last time they did that, I think, was 2012 or 2011, and they cut the list down by half. It was about 90,000, and they cut it down to 40-some thousand. So obviously, you have to question, well, yes, maybe they did their due diligence to try to reach every person and every household, right? But you have to think about the fact that these are people who, by definition, are mobile, don't have necessarily a fixed address, a fixed home, a telephone number that's current and consistent,
and over the
an
period
address
of years,
that's current and consistent.
Families change, right? Adults become senior citizens, people get married, people get divorced, children become adults. If the longer you wait to do something with someone on a waiting list, the more likely it is that their circumstances will be completely different.
And they won't need you to be on your waiting list.
And it's important to say that they opened up the waiting list, but this is a waiting list to wait. That this does not ensure that you are actually on the waiting list for public housing, because they haven't even filtered through this list of 200,000 plus people yet. So this is just the opportunity to be on a waiting list to get housing.
Okay, we're down to our last couple of minutes. Things that you've been sitting here not being able to wedge into the conversation. Anything? Speak now.
I'll just play devil's advocate for one moment and just say that when it comes to a lot of, let's say, ethnic communities or immigrant communities, we don't really consider that to be a community that we need to break up. We don't look at that as a toxic community. We look at those communities as having strengths, and the community network as being a positive thing. And I wish that in the future we would look at low-income African-American communities in the same way. I think that my memories of public housing are generally very good, of people who cooperated and collaborated and made the most of resources by pulling together and creatively enhancing their lives. So I think that's the way to go forward.
Well, to play devil's advocate to that, I mean, these are constructed ghettos. This is policy that made it that way. And, while I agree, I think there's too much demonization of the people, but, whether you're in Roseland or you're in Robert Taylor, there were policymakers who designed that that's where black people had
That's where we have to, and that's actually a good place to leave it. We'll pick that up on the next time we all get together again. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. Thank you so much, Lolly. Thank you so much. And Natalie's got a whole series coming up next week on WBEZ on gentrification. I want you to do that. Thank you, Eitan. And yes, we're running so late. I'm so sorry. Thanks for watching Chicago Newsroom. You can watch us here anytime you want, and we'll be back again next week with another show. I'm Ken Davis, Chicago Newsroom. Thanks. See you later. Bye.